The property tax bill on the kitchen table in Webster, Florida, came to $540. Not $540 a month, but $540 for the whole year, on a house the county assessor values at just under $78,000. 90 minutes south, in a waterfront town that gets called a retirement paradise on every list you have ever read, the same line on the same form reads $3,395. Why? Same state, same weather, same hurricane season. My name is Roy Baker, and I read Florida county tax rolls and insurance filings for a living, which is a strange thing to admit out loud. But here is my one rule, and it has never failed me. I do not trust any list of good places to retire that will not print the carrying cost. Not the purchase price, the carrying cost, which means what the house takes out of your account every year after you own it free and clear. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Ocala, Ohio, Ontario, it does not matter, I read every one. Now there is a list going around with a very good title on it. 12 unpopular Florida towns where retirees truly thrive. Good title, and I watched the whole thing. But here is the problem. 12 towns, 25 minutes, and not one property tax figure, not one insurance premium, not one number you could carry into a bank. Somebody in his comments put it better than I could. They said these are not unpopular towns, and you have not been given the full picture of the cost of living, and that taxes and insurance can be a sticker shock. That person is right. That comment is the reason I sat down and did this properly. So here is what happens in this one. Every town gets 3 numbers. What the county says the typical home there is worth, what the median owner actually pays in property tax, and what a homeowner in that county actually pays to insure it, taken from the state's own filing rather than a brochure. That third number is where Florida quietly decides your retirement, but almost nobody builds a list around it. In January, the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation published its Property Insurance Stability Report. Total premium collected, divided by policies in force with wind coverage, county by county, all 67 of them. The statewide average came out at $3,757 a year. Down in Monroe County, it is $7,829. In Palm Beach, $6,412. But look at the other end of that same report, because 5 counties sit down there together. Sumter at $2,111. Then Marion at $2,217. Baker at $2,317. But look at Wakulla at $2,335. Hernando at $2,342. Those 5 are the cheapest places to insure a house anywhere on the Florida rolls, and most people outside this state could not point to 4 of them on a map. Every town I am about to name sits inside one of those 5 counties. Every one. And here is the part I want you holding on to, because it is the whole reason this list exists. That other video names 12 towns, but not one of them is in any of those 5 counties. Not one. So here is the shape of it. I am counting down by what each town costs you to hold every year, tax plus insurance, highest to lowest. Number 1 carries for less than most people in this state spend on a truck payment, but there is also one town near the top that I got badly wrong for about 4 years, and I will own that when we reach it. Number 12, Weeki, Wachee, in Hernando County. You know the Springs, because the Mermaid Show has been running since 1947, and it is the only reason most people outside Florida have heard the name. But the thing nobody mentions is the water temperature. It holds at 74 degrees every day of the year, which means the river below it never turns cold and never turns warm. And on a Tuesday morning in February, you can put a kayak in and watch manatees with no other boat in sight. Now look at the numbers, because this is where the picture changes. Hernando County puts the typical home value here at $287,312. Median property tax bill, $2,446 a year. But the number that decides it is the insurance. County average, $2,342. Add the last 2, and you carry that house for $4,788 a year. That is the most expensive town on my list. But sit with it for a second, because $4,788 is roughly what plenty of owners in Charlotte and Pinellas County pay in property tax alone, before the insurance bill even arrives. So remember that when the next list waves a cheap town at you. Weeki, Wachee is my number 12, and it still costs less to hold than every town on the list you have already seen. But there is one thing to check before you fall in love. Hernando has been growing fast on its southern edge, and the traffic on Cortez Boulevard shows it. So drive that road at 5 in the afternoon, not at 10 in the morning, before you decide anything. And check which side of the county line the listing sits on, because Hernando runs from the Gulf Marshes up into the ridge, and the same county average covers both. Which means a house out toward the coastal flats and a house up near the ridge share a number on the state report. But they will not share a quote. And I should say how I read a town, because it is not done from a screen. My wife and I have a rule that we eat lunch somewhere before we form an opinion about it. But in Weeki Wachee that meant a plate of grouper at a counter, where the man beside me spent 20 minutes explaining why he had moved up from Pasco County. He was not selling anything. He just wanted somebody to know he had done the arithmetic and it had worked. That is the only kind of testimonial I trust. Number 11. Brooksville, also Hernando County. Brooksville is what happens when a town gets built on hills in a state famous for not having any. It sits about 200 feet up. That does not sound like much, but consider what it does to your flood exposure and to your July nights. There is a courthouse square, a hospital in town rather than 40 minutes away, and a farmer's market that has run long enough that the vendors know which customers take their tomatoes green. So what does Brooksville cost? Typical home value, $206,675. Median tax bill, $1,777. Insurance, that same Hernando figure of $2,342, which means a carrying cost of $4,119 a year. But for a retiree, the hospital matters more than the market. Here is one of the quiet cruelties of the cheap Florida town. You buy at 65, and by 78, you are driving an hour each way to a cardiologist. Brooksville does not have that problem, which is most of why it is on this list, and a lot of prettier places are not. And look at the courthouse square, because it is a working one and not a restored one for tourists. There is a hardware store, a pharmacy, lawyers upstairs, and people doing errands on a Wednesday. That sounds like a small thing until you have lived somewhere that emptied out at 4 in the afternoon. But there is a second thing about the elevation that never shows up in a listing. When a storm comes up the Gulf side of this state, the difference between a house at 10 feet and a house at 200 feet is not really about water reaching you. It is about what your carrier does with your renewal afterwards. Which means 200 feet and a metal roof is a very different conversation with an underwriter than the same house in a beach town, and that difference follows you for as long as you own the place. So which of those two houses is actually the cheap one? Number 10. Crawfordville in Wakulla County. Now Crawfordville is 20 minutes south of Tallahassee, but it is about as far from the Florida of the postcards as you can get while still being in Florida. So picture live oaks, Spanish moss, and the Wakulla River, which is spring-fed and clear and holds one of the largest and deepest freshwater springs anybody has measured on this continent. But now the three numbers. Typical home value, $175,486. Median tax bill, $1,778. Wakulla insurance, $2,335, which means a carrying cost of $4,113. But what Crawfordville really gives you is a state capital 20 minutes up the road. That means a teaching hospital, an international airport, a symphony if you want one, and grandchildren who can get a direct flight, which means you pay Wakulla County prices and use Leon County infrastructure. And that arbitrage is the entire argument for this town. But now the honest caution. Wakulla touches the Gulf at Panacea and at St. Mark's, and the further south you buy, the faster your quote climbs away from that county average. But stay inland of the highway, and the number I just gave you is the number you will be quoted. The other thing Wakulla gives you is the national forest on one side and the refuge on the other, which means a large share of the county can never be built on. So the supply that would normally arrive and change the character of a cheap county cannot arrive here. That is worth more over 20 years than any single year's tax bill. If you have only just found this, I am Roy. The reason I keep hammering on the county line rather than the town name is that the county is what your insurance company actually prices. Crawfordville and Panacea are 22 minutes apart. Same county, same courthouse, same average in the state report. But get a quote on both, and the numbers can differ by a 4-figure sum, because one of them sits inside a wind band and the other does not. The average is where the conversation starts. It is not the answer. Number 9. McClenny in Baker County. Baker is the third cheapest county in Florida to insure a home in, and almost nobody outside North Florida could find it on a map. McClenny is the county seat, 30 miles west of Jacksonville on the interstate, which is close enough that specialists and the airport are an easy morning, and far enough that the town still shuts down for the county fair. So look at what that buys. Typical home value, $204,732. Median tax bill, $1,747. But look at the insurance. Baker County average, $2,317. So the carrying cost is $4,064. The commute is the thing to test for yourself. 30 miles on the interstate is a 25-minute drive at 10 in the morning, and it is not a 25-minute drive at 5, because the whole western side of Jacksonville uses that road. So time it in both directions before you sign anything. But I like McClenny for a specific kind of person. Somebody who wants a real town with a Publix and a hospital and a Friday night football game, who does not want to pay Jacksonville prices, and who has family up in Georgia they would like to reach in an afternoon. If that is not you, this town will feel plain. But if it is you, it is close to perfect. Baker does something on the tax side that is easy to miss too. The effective rate in McClenny runs at 0.83%. Now that matters because this is a county with a small commercial base, and a small commercial base normally pushes the residential rate up rather than down. But it has not happened here. But whatever the commission has been doing with the millage, it has held. Which means a retiree buying at 200,000 faces a bill that would be half again as large across the county line in Duval. Number 8. Dunnellon in Marion County. Now Dunnellon sits where the Rainbow River meets the Withlacoochee. And the rainbow is one of those pieces of water that ruins other water for you. 600 million gallons a day, coming up out of the ground, clear enough to read a license plate through, 72 degrees in January and 72 degrees again in August. But here are the numbers. Typical home value, $205,653. Median tax bill, $1,752. Marion insurance, $2,217. Carrying cost, $3,969. But Marion County is worth understanding on its own terms, because it is the second cheapest county in the state for insurance, and it is neither small nor empty. There is a regional hospital system, an equestrian economy pulling real money in from outside, and an airport at Ocala, which means you are not trading medical care away for that insurance number, and that is rare. Normally in this state, the two things move together. Cheap insurance means thin population. Thin population means no specialists. And no specialists means the cheap town stops working for you at exactly the age you need it to work. Marion is where that trade breaks down, and it breaks down because the horse industry put real hospital money into a rural county 40 years ago. That is a historical accident, but you are allowed to benefit from it. And it shows up in more than the hospital. There is a working airport, a college, and enough outside money passing through that the restaurants stay open in August. A rural county with an outside income stream behaves completely differently from a rural county without one, and almost nobody checks for that before they buy. Number 7. Belleview in Marion County. Belleview sits a little south of Ocala on the old highway, and it is the kind of place people drive through on the way to somewhere else and never actually look at, which is exactly why it is still affordable. There is a downtown of maybe 4 blocks, a chain of lakes east of town, and the Cross Florida Greenway close enough for a morning walk that does not involve a sidewalk. So what is the bill? Typical home value, $166,280. Median tax bill, $1,602. Insurance, the Marion figure again, $2,217. Carrying cost, $3,819 a year. You are 12 minutes from the hospitals in Ocala and paying Bellevue taxes. That is the trade, and it is a good one. Now let me put you in a room, because this is where people actually decide. You are across a desk from an agent, and there are 2 files. One is a house in Bellevue at $166,000, carrying at $3,819 a year. The other is a house on the water on the Gulf side at $380,000, carrying at somewhere near $9,000. Roughly the same monthly outlay once you finance it. But one of them you own outright in a few years, and the other one owns you. Which file do you take? Be honest, because almost everybody says Bellevue out loud and then buys the water, and I have watched people do it at 68 years old. And the reason it happens is not stupidity. It is that the water house feels like the reward for 40 years of work, and the Bellevue house feels like a compromise. But look at what the arithmetic actually buys you. The difference between those two carrying costs is more than $5,000 a year, every year, for as long as you own it. Before the second half, I need to break something these lists quietly rely on, because believing it will cost you money. The rule everybody repeats is that coastal is expensive and inland is cheap. Except it is not true, and the state's own numbers say so. In that same January report, DeSoto County, well inland, averages $3,449. Okeechobee, also inland, $3,754. Glades, $3,475. Hardy, $3,396. Every one of those sits above the state average, and not one of them is near the ocean. So why? Because carriers do not price a binary. They price the age of the housing stock, whether the roofs are shingle or metal, how much manufactured housing sits on the rolls, the freshwater flood behavior around Lake Okeechobee, and above all the litigation history of that particular county. An older county full of 1970s roofs and an aggressive claims bar can cost you more, 10 miles from any water, than a newer coastal subdivision with a clean loss record. Which means that when somebody tells you to just move inland and save on insurance, they have handed you a slogan instead of a county. Remember, the 5 counties I named at the start are not cheap because they are inland. Hernando touches the Gulf. They are cheap because of what sits on their rolls and what happens in their courtrooms. Number 6. McIntosh, in Marion County. McIntosh is 400 and some people on the shore of Orange Lake, and the entire village sits on the National Register of Historic Places. Oak canopy over the road, houses from the 1880s with wraparound porches, and one weekend a year when the whole place turns into a festival and 40,000 people come through. But here is the oddity, and it is why McIntosh made this list. Typical home value, $317,666, the highest number on my entire countdown. Except the median effective tax rate in McIntosh is 0.48%, the lowest I found anywhere in these 5 counties. So the median tax bill lands at $1,509. Insurance, $2,217. Carrying cost, $3,726. Read that again. A house worth $317,000 carries for less every year than a house worth $200,000 in Brooksville. Purchase price and carrying cost are 2 different animals, and McIntosh is the cleanest proof of it I have. But the caution is real. 400 people means no grocery store, no pharmacy, no urgent care, which means driving to Ocala or Gainesville for all of it, and both are about half an hour. But if you cannot drive, this village is not for you, and I would rather say that plainly than sell you a porch. But the other thing about a village of 400 is that the housing stock barely turns over. There is no inventory in the ordinary sense. You are waiting for a specific house to come up, sometimes for a year. And if you're the kind of person who needs to move on a schedule, then McIntosh will simply not cooperate with you. If you have followed the arithmetic this far, you are already paying closer attention than most people who read the headline and stop. Whether you already own here, or you are still planning the move, the next several towns are the part you need, because the numbers stop being merely good and start being difficult to believe. Number 5. Glen St. Mary, in Baker County. But Glen St. Mary is 6 miles west of McClenny, and small in a way people either need or cannot stand. There was a nursery here that shipped Citra stock across the country for most of the 20th century, and the town still has that feeling of a place built around one good idea that worked. Now the numbers. Typical home value, $177,984. Median tax bill, $1,389. Baker insurance, $2,317. Carrying cost, $3,706. Which means you get McClenny's Hospital and Publix 6 miles up the road without paying to live beside them. For a couple who want land, a workshop, and a dog that can run, this is the cheapest honest version of that in North Florida. But understand what you are buying into. But this is farm country, and it behaves like farm country. There is spraying in season, there is equipment on the road at dawn, and the nearest thing to a night out is in McClenny. So none of that is a defect. It is just the real texture of the place, which the listings never mention. Number 4. Sopchoppy, in Wakulla County. Sopchoppy has about 450 people, a river named after it, and a worm gruntin' festival that is exactly what it sounds like, and has run since 2000. The Sopchoppy River runs black from the tannin in the cypress, and it is one of the prettiest paddles in the state. So what does that cost? Typical home value, $113,064. Median tax bill, $1,347. Wakulla insurance, $2,335. Carrying cost, $3,682. But look at the rate here. Sopchoppy runs at 1.20%, which is high, higher than Marion, higher than Sumter. Except the houses are cheap enough that a high rate on a low value still lands you at $1,300. This is the thing people get backwards. You do not pay a rate, you pay a bill. And this is why every list that ranks towns by tax rate is quietly useless to a retiree. A 1.4% rate on a $100,000 house costs you less than a 0.9% rate on a $300,000 house. And the second town will show up higher on every ranking you can find online. So rank by the bill and the whole map rearranges itself. Everything I have worked out for this state, all 67 counties, 20 towns worth buying into, and 20 worth walking away from, is written up properly in the Florida Buy and Avoid list. It is linked in the description. But stay right here, because the 2 towns at the top of this countdown carry for less than half of what number 12 does, and almost nobody is talking about either of them. Now I want to put something in front of you before the last 3, because it changes every number I have said today, and it happened while that other video was being edited. On the 2nd of June, the Florida legislature passed House Joint Resolution 1F, which the governor's people named Save Our Homes from Excessive Property Taxes. It cleared the House 75-26 and the Senate 30-9. It is now a constitutional amendment on the ballot on the 3rd of November, and it needs 60% of the vote. So what happens if it passes? The homestead exemption on the non-school portion of your property tax goes from $50,000 today to $150,000 in 2027, and to $250,000 in 2028. The legislature's own staff analysis says roughly 60% of homesteaded owners in this state would then owe nothing at all on the non-school part of the bill. Now look at what that does to my list. Webster, Bushnell, Citra, Sopchoppy, McIntosh, every one of those towns has a typical home value under the $250,000 line. The school portion stays exactly where it is, so nobody's bill goes to zero. But the non-school portion, on a house in that range, largely disappears. So work it on a real house. Take the Bushnell figure I am about to give you, a typical home valued at just over $100,000. That entire value sits under the $250,000 line, which means the non-school portion of its bill is exempted away, and what remains is the school portion alone. Now do the same on a $380,000 house on the coast. The exemption covers a slice, and the rest of the bill carries on exactly as before, which means this amendment does not help every Florida owner equally. It helps the owner of a cheap house enormously, and the owner of an expensive house a little, and every town on my list sits on the helpful side of that line. That is the most important fact for anybody choosing a Florida town this year, and the popular video on this exact subject went up 24 days after that vote, and never mentions it once. Number 3. Citra, in Marion County. Citra is orange country, or it was, north of Wakulla, on the old brick highway. The pineapple orange was developed here in the 1870s, and the town has never been anything but agricultural. Orange Lake on one side, horse farms on the other. Now look at the bill. Typical home value, $130,382. Median tax bill, $1,184. Marion insurance, $2,217. Carrying cost, $3,401 a year, which is less than the property tax bill alone in the town that other list crowned at number 1. But here is the honest limit on Citra. There is no downtown to speak of, and what looks like a bargain on a listing is often a manufactured home on acreage rather than a blockhouse. So that is not automatically a problem, except that it changes your insurance conversation completely, and it is the single most common thing people miss when they shop Marion County on price. Number 2. Bushnell, in Sumter County. Bushnell is the seat of Sumter, and Sumter is the cheapest insurance county on that whole state report at $2,111 a year. But here is what people find hard to hold in their head. It is the same county that contains a large part of the villages. Same insurance rating, same courthouse, wildly different price. So here is the arithmetic. Typical home value in Bushnell, $101,430. But the effective rate, 0.76%. Median tax bill, $714 a year. Insurance, $2,111, which means a carrying cost of $2,825. And remember, this is not a hamlet. There is a courthouse square, a hospital campus, the Dade Battlefield Historic Site, and the Interstate 10 minutes east, which puts Tampa and Orlando both about an hour away. So look at what that really is. A functioning county seat, where the median owner pays $714 a year in property tax. And remember what sits 10 minutes north of it. The Villages is the single largest retirement development in the country, and it pulled an entire medical economy in with it, which means the specialists, the imaging, the cardiology, all of it is already built and already staffed. But you do not have to buy inside it to use it. That is the whole trade Bushnell offers. Number 1. Webster in Sumter County. Webster is about 1,200 people and one enormous thing. But the flea market on Monday mornings has run since 1937. It takes over 40 acres of the town, and half the county turns up for it. And that one day a week does something to a small place that is hard to explain until you have stood in it. A town of 1,200 people handles a crowd of thousands, which means the roads are wider than they need to be, the parking exists, and the businesses that would have died in a town this size are still open on the other 6 days. Beyond that, it is farmland, churches, and a quiet that people either love immediately or cannot stand. Now the numbers, and this is the ones I want you to remember. Typical home value, $77,540. But the effective rate, 0.82%. Median annual property tax bill, $540. Insurance, that same Sumter figure of $2,111, which means a total carrying cost, $2,651 a year to hold a house in Florida. But now the honest part, and this is the one I got wrong. For about 4 years I told people Webster was too small to retire into because there is no hospital in town and the grocery run is real. Then I actually drove it with a clock. So what did it say? The hospital campus at Bushnell is 14 minutes. Wildwood and the village's medical corridor is under half an hour, which means I had been repeating something I had never checked. So if you take one thing from me today, let it be that you time the drive yourself, in the afternoon, before you believe anybody about it. And that includes me. And here is the one thing you can do this week without spending anything. Pick the town you are actually circling, and look up 2 numbers before you look at a single listing. The county's average premium from that state report, and the median tax bill for that specific town rather than the county. Then add them and ask whether you would sign up to pay that every year for the next 20. Because that is the number you are really buying, and almost nobody works it out until the first renewal lands and it is too late to change their mind. One more before I close, because a viewer earned it. On that other video, somebody thanked him for not naming their town, and the town was Lecanto, over in Citrus County. So I looked it up. Typical home value $244,066. Effective rate 0.75%. Median tax bill $1,804. But Citrus is not one of the 5 cheapest insurance counties, which is exactly why Lecanto did not make my 12. It is a good town. It just does not clear the bar this particular list is built on, and I would rather show you the bar than quietly bend it. So go back to that kitchen table in Webster and the property tax bill of $540 and set it beside the waterfront town with the $3,395 bill that every retirement list in this state keeps putting at number 1. But nobody hid those numbers from you. They sat on the county roll the whole time. Not one of those lists would print them. Here is what I want from you, and it costs you nothing. Tell me your Florida town, the one you live in, or the one you keep circling on a map, and I will tell you what its carrying cost really looks like. But tell me what your insurance renewal did to you this year, because I am collecting those, and the pattern is worse than the averages suggest. And tell me which of these 12 you would actually move to, because I went in expecting to pick Brooksville, and came out arguing with myself about McIntosh. I answer every one, and the town you name might be the one I open with next time. If you think the real story of this market is the one the headlines keep skipping, hit subscribe right now, because next time I am taking these same 3 numbers to the 10 Florida towns people are quietly leaving, and I will put the same property tax and insurance dollars against every one of them. 2 of those towns are on everybody's best places to retire list this year, and the Webster arithmetic takes them apart.